What if I told you that China didn't steal the future? They were handed the blueprint, not to beat America, but to show the elite how to rule it. In episode 1, we broke down the real cause of the American Revolution: control over money. The colonies had their own currency, colonial script, and it worked. It kept wealth local and debt out. So the British, under pressure from central banks, outlawed it. That wasn't about policy, it was about power. In episode 2, we showed how that same power structure reorganized America, first after the Civil War, then again in 1933, and finally after 1940, rewriting the legal framework to shift sovereignty from the people to the financial elite. Now we're in the final phase. The infrastructure is in place, the legal groundwork has been laid, and now the next step is being deployed: a global digital control system fused from finance, AI, and identity. This isn't a forecast, it's a rollout. Biometric identity, programmable money, central bank digital currencies. This isn't capitalism, it's software-based feudalism. And the model was perfected in China. So let's stop and ask the real questions. Why is this happening? Why are inflation, collapse, and censorship all accelerating? Well, the same people who engineered the crisis now offer us a digital solution. The answer isn't incompetence, it's consolidation through collapse. Catherine Austin Fitts, former HUD's Assistant Secretary and publisher of the Solari Report, has said this for years. They're not destroying the current system by accident, they're moving us to a new model, one that lets them control every transaction, every identity, and every person. In other words, the collapse is the plan. And here's the proof, straight from their own mouths. In June 2023, the Bank for International Settlements, or BIS, published their annual economic report. It called for a central bank digital currency, CBDCs, that are programmable, trackable, and able to restrict what you're allowed to buy. Their words: a CBDC could allow for control over spending patterns, limit purchases, or impose conditions on transactions. In November 2022, Reuters reported that the G20, the 20 largest economies on Earth, had officially agreed to implement the digital health certificates using WHO standards tied to biometric ID. That's not conspiracy, that's Reuters, quoting G20 leadership. In February 2023, the World Economic Forum, or WEF, released a white paper titled Advancing Digital Agency. It openly calls for linking your digital ID to your bank account, health records, travel data, and even your carbon footprint. That's the BIS, the G20, and the WEF, all calling for a global system where your access to money, movement, and medical care depends upon compliance. And again, none of that is speculation. You can read it for yourself. This is the new model, and it's already rolled out. This isn't a future threat, it's a live deployment. And the evidence is right in front of us. In 4 connected layers: infrastructure, funding, legislation, and narrative control. So let's talk infrastructure, the hardware of control. In July 2023, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman launched WorldCoin, a biometric ID system that scans your iris using a device called the Orb. Their stated mission is to create a unique digital ID for every person on Earth tied to a crypto wallet. As of early 2024, WorldCoin is now operating in major U.S. cities, including New York, Los Angeles, Miami, and Chicago, offering people a small amount of cryptocurrency in exchange for their biometric and government ID data. In Los Angeles, users are required to show government-issued photo ID and undergo facial and iris scans to receive their World ID. And the company admits that while it promises anonymity, it stores encrypted biometric hashes, not just one-time scans. That's a permanent record of your eyeball, linked to your wallet, your phone, and your identity. And what about funding? Who's paying for this grid? WorldCoin is backed by Andreessen Horowitz, Khosla Ventures, Sam Bankman Fried's old backers, and LinkedIn co founder Reid Hoffman. And it's not just private capital. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are funding biometric financial infrastructure in Africa, India, and Latin America under the label of financial inclusion. As Catherine Austin Fitts puts it, they're building control grids in the developing world first. What they test in Uganda, they bring to Chicago next. And what about legislation? The legal cage is already being built. In March 2022, President Biden signed an executive order 14067 calling for research and development of a U.S. central bank digital currency. In December 2023, Congress passed the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act, which quietly lays the groundwork for digital asset regulation, including KYC, otherwise known as Know Your Customer rules tied to biometric identity. Meanwhile, the EU's Digital Services Act, passed in July 2023, mandates identity verification and behavior modification across platforms. The legal framework is here. All they need is a crisis to trigger the switch. Propaganda and narrative control? This is a soft coup. In April 2023, the World Economic Forum partnered with Interpol to fight financial misinformation, but their joint press release didn't focus on criminals. It focused on destabilizing narratives about CBDC and digital finance. In other words, questioning the system makes you a target. News media, pop culture, and even influencers are now parroting the same line. Cash is dirty, digital is efficient. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. They're not just rewriting the system, they're rewiring your brain to accept it. If you think America and China are enemies, you're missing the real story. Because the system being built here, biometric ID, digital wallets, social scoring, AI surveillance, wasn't stolen from China. It was modeled after it. The Chinese Communist Party didn't invent mass control tech alone. They had help. U.S. investment firms, tech giants, and elite foundations funded, trained, and refined the CCP's digital dictatorship. Now that beta test is over, they're bringing it home. China's social credit system, launched in 2014, ties behavior, online activity, and financial data into one state-run scoring system. It's powered by massive data collection, facial recognition, and AI-driven analytics, all plugged into banking, travel, and housing systems. But the tech wasn't homegrown. Microsoft opened a major AI lab in Beijing in 1998, training the engineers who later built facial recognition systems used by the Chinese state. Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, and JP Morgan Chase all expanded financial infrastructure inside China during the 2000s and 2010s, helping digitize Chinese capital controls. Google's parent company Alphabet invested in Chinese AI surveillance firm Megvii, the creator of Face++, used to track and detain Uyghurs. China's system isn't failing, it's being copied. In 2020, the People's Bank of China launched a digital yuan, a programmable, traceable CBDC that can expire or be restricted based on user behavior. In pilot programs, the state has blocked spending for citizens with poor social credit scores. This isn't just surveillance, it's enforcement. And Western central banks took notes. The European Central Bank's digital euro proposal includes privacy tiers based on user identification. The U.S. Federal Reserve's Vice Chair, Lael Brainard, openly praised China's CBDC rollout in 2021, calling it a model of programmable monetary innovation. Again, Not my words, theirs. Catherine Austin Fitts says they're copying the CCP. Fitts has also been warning for years that the so-called East versus West conflict is fake binary. Her quote, "The same investors who built China's control grid are building it here. The CCP was the prototype. The West is the production model." In her 2021 briefing, The Injection Fraud, Fitch showed how biometric surveillance, vaccine passports, and CBDCs were being linked into one integrated control stack, exactly like China's model. The real war isn't between countries. It's between centralized power and personal sovereignty. And this isn't paranoia, it's policy. Look around. New York is now piloting digital ID verification for unemployment benefits. The TSA is testing facial recognition boarding in over 16 airports. The IRS now requires ID.me facial scans for online access. These are not isolated changes. This is a copy and paste of China's grid, rolled out under the guise of convenience, safety, and fraud prevention. So, is Donald Trump America's last hope or part of the problem? Donald Trump branded himself as the outsider, the billionaire who couldn't be bought. But here's the truth: his actions served the same elite financial class he claimed to oppose. Let's break it down. In 2017, Trump signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, slashing corporate tax rates from 35% to 21%. The result? The top 1% received 83% of the benefits. Trump filled his cabinet with Wall Street and private equity insiders: Steve Mnuchin from Goldman Sachs, Wilbur Ross, which is a Rothschild banker, and Gary Cohn, which also came from Goldman Sachs. Instead of reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act, which was repealed in 1999 under Clinton, Trump backed off the idea entirely once he was elected, despite campaign rhetoric supporting it. Under Trump, Dodd-Frank financial regulations were rolled back in 2018, deregulating dozens of banks and weakening oversight. Meanwhile, Trump's tough on China trade war didn't bring factories back. It broke supply chains, inflated consumer prices, and accelerated the move to automation and offshore workarounds. So ask yourself, if the billionaire class keeps winning under his leadership, is Trump really your guy? Or is he just the elite's controlled opposition, rallying the working class while enabling the globalist playbook behind the scenes? It's not just about WorldCoin and CBDCs. It's about the collapse of the old system and how the elite have been quietly engineering the conditions to trigger it. They're not just waiting for a crisis, they're manufacturing it through trade wars, economic sanctions, and global supply chain manipulation. This isn't an accident, this is an orchestrated financial collapse. In 2018, Donald Trump initiated the US-China trade war, slapping tariffs on $250 billion worth of Chinese goods. The goal? To level the playing field and bring manufacturing back to the United States. But the reality? Tariffs raise costs for U.S. consumers and businesses, escalating supply chain disruptions. Fast forward to 2023, and the trade war is still ongoing, with China retaliating by ramping up production of alternative currency systems like the digital yuan. Is this really about trade? Or is it a way to escalate tensions until the system finally breaks? What we're seeing is a staged conflict designed to create economic uncertainty while pushing nations towards global financial unification under CBDCs. China's Belt and Road Initiative is quietly expanding while the U.S. focuses on tariffs. U.S. sanctions against Russia have driven the rise of alternative global payment systems, sidestepping SWIFT and the US dollar, exposing the vulnerability of America's financial dominance. This isn't an accident. This is an economic warfare disguised as politics. They want the dollar's collapse to pave the way for the new digital financial grid. In 2023, the US dollar lost 8% of its global share in international trade. China and Russia have doubled down on de-dollarization, with growing calls to settle trade using national currencies or digital currencies. China and Saudi Arabia just signed agreements to trade oil in yuan instead of dollars. Russia's central bank has openly declared its intention to move away from the dollar in favor of alternative digital currencies. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes are pushing the U.S. economy into a recessionary spiral, putting pressure on the dollar and forcing the Fed's hand to pivot to digital currency. This isn't just a trade war, it's a carefully orchestrated move to undermine the U.S.'s financial hegemony and pivot to a digital currency system controlled by the ruling elite. So, what happens next when everything crashes? The elite's endgame isn't a simple collapse, it's a controlled demolition. They'll trigger a financial crisis using the debt ceiling crisis, hyperinflation, or even a manufactured financial panic to collapse the old monetary system. At that point, they'll offer the only solution left: a unified digital currency controlled by central banks and the infrastructure to track, control, and limit spending. The global financial system will recenter around a programmable CBDC that tracks your every transaction, your social score, and even your movements. The final piece of the puzzle: centralized AI oversight. The global elite want control, and they're getting it with biometrics, social scoring, and total surveillance. As global and financial systems teeter, a new architecture is swiftly being constructed, not to empower citizens, but to monitor, manage, and manipulate them. In May 2025, WorldCoin, backed by OpenAI Sam Altman, launched its biometric identity verification system in 6 major U.S. cities: Atlanta, Austin, Los Angeles, Miami, Nashville, and San Francisco. Users are required to undergo iris scans using Orb devices to obtain a World ID, which is linked to the platform's digital currency. WorldCoin plans to deploy 7,500 of these biometric devices across the U.S. by the end of 2025, aiming to create a global proof of personhood network. This initiative has raised significant privacy concerns, as it involves collecting and storing sensitive biometric data, potentially paving the way for a surveillance infrastructure under the guise of a digital identity verification. While the Trump administration has publicly opposed the issuance of a U.S. CBDC, citing privacy and sovereignty concerns, legislative efforts continue to shape the digital financial landscape. For instance, the No CBDC Act was introduced in Congress to limit the Federal Reserve's ability to issue a central bank digital currency. Despite these legislative moves, the administration has mandated that, effective September 30th, 2025, all federal disbursements, including benefits and tax refunds, transition to electronic payment methods, eliminating paper checks. This shift towards a fully digital payment system raises concerns about increased government oversight and control over individual financial transactions. The Department of Defense has outlined the strategic role of artificial intelligence in national security, emphasizing its use in safeguarding military and industrial infrastructure against espionage and data breaches. Additionally, the Department of Energy has identified 16 federal sites across the country for the development of data centers and AI infrastructure, aiming to bolster the nation's capability in artificial intelligence. These developments suggest a concerted effort to integrate AI into various aspects of governance and surveillance, potentially leading to unprecedented levels of monitoring and control over the populace. Project 2025, spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation, outlines a comprehensive plan to restructure the federal government, centralizing power within the executive branch. The project includes proposals to replace thousands of federal workers with loyalists and to exert greater control over independent agencies. In alignment with this agenda, the Trump administration has taken steps to expand presidential authority over agencies like the SEC and FDIC, further eroding the systems of checks and balances. These actions reflect a broader strategy to consolidate power and diminish institutional independence, raising alarms about the future of democratic governance. The rapid deployment of biometric ID systems, digital currencies, AI surveillance infrastructure, and the consolidation of executive power are not isolated developments. They represent a coordinated effort to establish a comprehensive control grid, fundamentally altering the relationship between the state and its citizens. And here's how they're manufacturing the crisis. And this is why your consent is being engineered. You never let a serious crisis go to waste. At least that's what Rahm Emanuel says. But these days, they don't just exploit crises, they manufacture them. Social media is now flooded with AI bots, fake personas, political operatives, and psychological influence tools that deliberately inflame tension, spread disinformation, and create fatigue. The result? Public trust in online disclosure collapses, and people start begging for digital ID and verified users just to feel sane again. That's not an accident, it's a setup. You're headed toward verified ID as a solution to the chaos they created. In mid 2023 and early 2024, glitches at major banks like Wells Fargo, Chase, and B of A locked thousands of users out of their accounts, froze balances, or delayed paychecks. These incidents created just enough panic to float the narrative that a better system is needed. Instant, traceable, digital payments under full federal control. Flash mob thefts and viral videos of looting have been all over the news, especially in cities like San Francisco, LA, and Chicago. Behind the headlines, many of these stories are also quietly eliminating cash and installing facial recognition systems to identify customers. Once again, create the problem, offer the pre-built solution. Chaos, control. The U.S. southern border is in chaos. Fentanyl deaths keep rising. Millions of migrants are undocumented. The proposed fix? National biometric identity for all. They don't need to convince everyone. They just need to convince enough people to be scared and too exhausted to fight back. That's how you get a mass adoption of surveillance tech. Not through open debate, but through engineered fatigue and pre-baked solutions. Never let a good crisis go to waste, as Rahm Emanuel said. In this concluding phase, the strategy becomes evident. Manufactured crisis to justify authoritarian solutions, leading to centralization of powers and erosion of individual freedoms. Engineered crisis as catalysts for control are things like AI-driven social media manipulation. A study by the University of Zurich revealed that AI bots could convincingly alter users' opinions on platforms like Reddit, raising concerns about the authenticity of online disclosure and potential for AI to shape public opinion covertly. WorldCoin, backed by Sam Altman, is deploying iris scanning devices in 6 major U.S. cities, promoting a proof of personhood system. The move comes as a response to increasing concerns over AI-driven scams and identify fraud, suggesting a push towards biometric verification as a solution to digital insecurity. The Trump administration has adopted significant portions of the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, aiming to consolidate executive power, dismantle federal agencies, and replace career officials with loyalists. This plan includes reclassifying civil service rules to allow for easier dismissal and replacement, effectively centralizing authority within the executive branch. Recent executive actions have included attempts to defund public media outlets like NPR and PBS, and efforts to access sensitive personal data, such as Social Security information, under the guise of efficiency and security. These moves indicate a trend towards undermining independent institutions and increasing surveillance capabilities. The convergence of AI manipulation, biometric surveillance, and executive overreach signals a deliberate shift towards a controlled society. Recognizing these patterns is crucial for safeguarding democratic principles and individual liberties. So now you see the playbook. The infrastructure is being built, the propaganda is live, and the surveillance state is going biometric. This isn't theory anymore. It's happening in real time, backed by headlines, funded by billionaires, and quietly enforced by policy. But here's the part they don't want you to know. Control only works if you comply. This channel exists because people like you don't. You ask questions, you think critically, you prepare, and if you're watching this, you're already ahead of the curve. But freedom isn't free anymore. We're building an independent platform where speech is protected, privacy is respected, and truth still matters. Join me on Patreon, where the algorithm doesn't decide what you see, and your support helps us stay uncensored, unbroken, and unbought. The link's in the description. Be a part of the resistance before the system locks in, because once it does, there's no going back.